Welcome to the 13th video in the 50 Shades of Horror series. I'm your host, Roommate. Today we'll be discussing 2007's 1408, and here's where you can watch this movie via streaming. Stick around to the end of the video to see what the 14th movie will be. 1408 is a very different movie from what we've gone over so far. It isn't a movie about monsters, murderers, goblins, ghosts, witches, aliens, or any other personified entity. It's about
an evil fucking room.
It's a psychological horror film, which may be my favorite subgenre. Instead of focusing on an external threat, this is a movie about the inner mental turmoil of our hero, though it is dramatized for us. It's not like we just watched John Cusack grimace for 2 hours, so it makes categorizing the fear pretty subjective. If wondering when the aggressor will strike is what makes your palms sweat, then this movie will seem pretty tame. If real-life tragedies and their repression frightens you, then this movie will be a tough watch. But even if you are leaning towards the former, the movie has some clever ways of ratcheting up the tension despite the lack of a more conventional antagonist. Understanding this movie relies on understanding the protagonist, Mike Enslin. He's a non-fiction horror writer who travels from town to town looking for haunted spots to write about. His books' titles are all listicles: 10 Nights in 10 Haunted Houses, 10 Nights in 10 Haunted Castles, etc. He's a jaded man who knows the commercial viability of what he's doing, but sees no greater purpose in it. He knows that his audience believes in the supernatural, but he has no such superstitious beliefs.
I'm a good researcher. I travel an EMF meter. Nothing would make me happier than to get a glimpse of the light at the end of the tunnel.
So you're saying there's no such thing as ghosts?
I've never seen one, but they're awfully convenient for desperate hotels.
Why he feels this way, the story of his life so far, is not readily apparent. It is generally a good idea for a psychological horror movie to keep the exact details of its protagonist a secret. It communicates their repression. They avoid dealing with their past. Take, for instance, Mike's reaction to an avid fan complimenting him about his work before he lost his passion, and inquiring about the real emotional weight behind his art.
The relationship in the book with the father and the son, it's probably too personal, but it's so authentic. Is it true?
No.
It's enough to let the audience know that the subject of his father is important without letting them know anything specific. In other subgenres, a character's backstory is important for knowing how and why they react the way they do to the story's events, so you'd want to quickly and subtly establish all you need to know. But in this genre, making peace with their past is the real meat of the narrative, so it's best to treat their backstory as foreshadowing of the trials to come. The movie mostly takes place in a room in a hotel in New York. This room, in reality on the 13th floor, is one that is not easily available to Michael. From the phone call to book the room, to checking in with the concierge, to even a sit-down meeting with the hotel manager, Mike is rebuffed in his attempts to spend a night in the room. He is told about its sordid past, of dozens of deaths, which do not faze his determination to cover the room for his new book. After all, he doesn't believe in the supernatural component, and he knows that his fans really want to find the most haunted place of all time, the place they could choose to go to have their suspicions about the afterlife confirmed. So he sees no harm, and writes off all of these warnings as a long con by the hotel to gain a bit of publicity. Arriving in the room is unimpressive for Mike. It's not remarkably good or bad. It's painfully average. But of course, that doesn't last long. It begins with small things that are still believable with mundane explanations. The window shuts down on his hand, drawing blood, but this could just be caused by the janky old building, right? Some mints inexplicably appear on his pillow, and the toilet paper he had used a moment ago is surreptitiously replaced. But this could be the result of someone hiding in the room to mess with him, right? Then, as things escalate, he sees a mysterious figure across the room who mirrors his every action, before it's revealed that this person is his doppelganger. He is attacked by a strange figure before they disappear. He tries to leave the room, only to have his key break, and the door won't budge. He attempts to climb across the ledge to the room next to him, but finds no windows on the outside save for his own. He is stuck in the room, no matter what he does. And so his descent into dealing with his own issues begins. His bathroom is magically replaced with the one from his father's assisted care facility, where he has to talk to his dad. In a momentary break from his implied dementia, his dad lets out these ominous words.
As you were, I was. As I am, you will be.
This is a translation of the ancient Latin gravestone inscription, Tu fui ego eris. It is meant to remind us that those who lived in the past were once no different than us, and that the fate they have met will be ours one day. It's interesting that his father, who is not actually deceased in the movie, says these words, meaning that the death may not be exclusively physical, since the mind can pass before the body.
Pretty grim stuff.
But even more grim is the reason why Mike has adopted his nihilistic outlook on life. He has a wife, but they're separated and effectively divorced. But their reason for splitting was that their daughter, Katie, was taken from them by a terrible illness. While she was fighting for her life, they assured her that she would make it through and survive. They told her that when she would eventually pass on, much later, that after her death she would go on to a wonderful paradise in her afterlife. And in the injustice of losing her so soon, so undeservingly, Mike lambasted against all the platitudes they had offered her, believing that if they had focused themselves on something more tangible that they could have saved her. His wife Lily knows that this is just another fantasy of Mike's. She knows that Katie's death was beyond their control, and that his insistence on turning her passing into a cosmic lesson is just a way for him to hold on to the fight, because if he were to make peace with her death for the absurd tragedy that it is, it would mean that he had accepted her death in a sense, which he can't bring himself to do.
Mike tries to use the air vents to escape the room, but it only brings him visions of his past.
He sees the life that he had hoped for with Lily and Katie reflected in the moments of her infancy, when they were still blissfully unaware of the cruel fate that awaited them. He looks down upon a fight with his father, who saw no value in his artistic pursuits, knowing that his dad's dismissal of his work would eventually prove to be true in the frivolity of his listicle legacy. He is chased out of these air ducts by an eyeless corpse, itself another grim reflection of his moving through life without a vision of where he wants to go, waiting to be struck down and returned to dust.
The movie's end finds him in a nightmarish husk of the room, looking badly burnt and broken.
He meets his daughter once again, so he has to relive the pain of holding her close, telling her that it'll be alright before she crumbles to ash in his arms. The room then starts over again, returning to its pristine original image, and he is tormented by the phone.
You can take advantage of our express checkout system.
The room wants him to believe that the only way out is suicide, but he takes another approach, deciding to burn down the room and the narcissistic self-loathing that it represents. He may not be able to make it out, but he'll fight to destroy this evil self-obsessive mentality, saving others from going down this ultimately fruitless path. So 1408 is scary in primarily conceptual ways. It forces us to think about our own mortality, the purpose, or lack thereof, of suffering in our lives. It shows how even those of us who are successful and admired by society can be running away from our pain, masking the nonsense that we tell ourselves to avoid accepting these harsh truths in continuous vacuous work. And that earnest exploration of such horrific concepts makes this a great horror film. To be fair, I do think this film deserves a bit of criticism. The over-reliance on the Howie scream is pretty distracting, as are the cliches of library microfilm and stock images of the room's victims. And the worst of all is the appearance of some of the room's previous victims, who are made to look like film recordings from their time periods. These are all lazy and off-putting, and while they don't make up a significant part of the runtime, the movie would be improved if these aspects were handled more creatively. And for every questionable choice the movie makes, it makes several inspired ones, such as the great use of distorted audio, the impressive set design, and the innovative visuals.
But what do you think? Do you think this movie deserves this spot on the list?
I mean, it probably should, because 1 + 4 + 0 + 8 does equal 13, but hey, I'm willing to listen to your arguments. Let me know in the comments. This week's recommendation is for Real Delusional Pictures. This channel creates video essays that are detailed, close studies of movies. For 1408, they focus on seeing the movie as an allegory for the story of Dante's Inferno. It's a very unique approach to analyzing the movie, with some very thought-provoking insights.
The story of Dante's Inferno represents the soul's journey to God as people recognize the sin in their lives and reject that sin. Dante is able to see the effects of sin on a person by traversing the 9 layers of hell with the poet Virgil as his guide to tell him about which sin is being punished on each layer. Descending first through limbo, then lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, heresy, violence, fraud, and at the bottom, the deepest and coldest layer of hell, treachery, where Satan is encased in ice.
So check out 1408, the philosophical depths that horror can reach. The link's in the description. Again, the 50 Shades of Horror will pivot into a very different type of movie with its 14th entry. It's 2020's Freaky, and here's where you can stream this funny slasher movie. Subscribe and click the bell so that you know when that movie is released. And make sure to tell your friends about this challenge.
See you next Saturday for Freaky, and thank you so much for watching.